This morning's State Government Committee meeting is a subcommittee on campaign finance and elections hearing on Article 5 term limits and specifically relating to congressional term limits. We have a couple testifiers joining us, and I would like to note that we also did invite a Dr. Casey Burgat from George Washington University to present the other side. Unfortunately, he was able to join here, but we will solicit testimony from him, and we will then circulate that to members if anything is provided. Term limits on members of Congress is something that I hear about often in my district, and our hearing this morning will focus on the concept of congressional term limits itself, with an emphasis on the prospective benefits or drawbacks, the impact of term limits in other legislative bodies, and in comparison to other proposals for congressional reform. I want to thank our testifiers for their participation, as well as remind everyone that due to the Sunshine Act requirements, if the virtual broadcast of this hearing experiences any technical difficulties, we will pause until those difficulties are resolved. And as I understand right now, the live stream is up and working, but again, if there are any issues, we will pause the meeting at that point. Before we begin, I would like to also note that I have introduced House Resolution 57 on this topic of Article 5 term limits here in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. So with that, I will call up our first two testifiers. We have Kenn Quinn, who is a Regional Director of U.S. Term Limits, and Mike Riley, who is a Pennsylvania Legislative Advocate for U.S. Term Limits. Gentlemen, if you can please join us. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. And we're going to go around and introduce members so that you're familiar with everybody who is here in the room today. I'm Representative Ryan McKenzie from the 131st District in portions of Lehigh and Berks counties, and I serve as the subcommittee chairman for this subcommittee.
Good morning. I'm Representative Malcolm Kenyatta from the 181st District in the heart of Philadelphia. I'm the Democratic chair of the subcommittee and really look forward to your testimony today.
Good morning, gentlemen. Craig Statch, representing the 145th District in Bucks County.
Representative Frank Ryan, 101st. Mike, good seeing you again. And I was told I have a booming voice, so I'm trying to tone it down. I don't always hear myself, so thank you.
Good morning. Representative Dawn Kiefer from the 92nd District, York and Cumberland counties.
Good morning, Representative Madden, 115th Legislative District, Monroe County. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Ben Sanchez from the 153rd District in Montgomery County.
Good morning. Jared Solomon, 202nd in Northeast Philadelphia.
Regina Young, 185th District, Philadelphia and Delaware counties.
Hi, good morning. I'm Joe Webster. I represent the 150th in Montgomery County.
Great. Well, thank you to everybody for being here this morning. In addition to a lot of public interest, it seems like there is a lot of interest from our membership as well. The subcommittee is only consisted of a smaller number of members, but clearly members from the rest of the committee are interested in this topic as well, so we're glad they're able to join us here. So with that, we'll turn it over to the two of you and look forward to your testimony.
I apologize. I'll start again. Chairman McKenzie, Chairman Kenyatta, and members of the Subcommittee on Campaign Finance and Elections. My name is Kenn Quinn. Thank you for this opportunity. Good morning, and I appreciate the time we can spend here in the next few minutes to discuss this very important issue. I'm from Bridgeton, Maine, and I'm here in support, obviously, of congressional term limits, and one of the main reasons for that is because, as it was mentioned earlier, this is an issue that many people around the country and in the state of Pennsylvania support. I just want to reference two of the exhibits I provided, two polls. One is the recent poll by Scott Rasmussen, which was a national poll, and it shows that this issue, term limits for Congress, is supported by 82% of the American people, and that is 87% Republicans, 83% Democrats, and 78% independents. This is the #1 issue in the country today that spans the political spectrum for support, and which is what's required in order to have a successful amendment. Here in Pennsylvania, the numbers are very tight. It's 79% overall, and that's 78% Republican, 79% Democrats, and 77 independents. That's just one of the reasons we support this. And the reason there is such high support among the American people, it's simple. Congress is broken. It's dysfunctional. We see this on a daily basis, and this is nothing new. This issue, the American people have been wanting for decades. You may recall in the 1990s, 23 states passed laws putting term limits on their own congressional delegations. 21 of those states that people actually voted for it at the ballot box. I'm from Maine. We voted for it twice. And unfortunately, what happened was it got challenged. It rose and it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in 1995, the Supreme Court ruled against all 23 laws, overturning those laws. And I provided the quote. This is what the court stated. Quote, state imposition of term limits for congressional service would affect such a fundamental change in the constitutional framework that it must come through a constitutional amendment properly passed under the procedures set forth in Article 5, unquote. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the stats on Article 5, the process. You already know that. It's either 2/3 of both houses of Congress or upon the application of 2/3 of the state legislatures. We don't have a lot of faith that Congress is going to limit their own terms. We do have a lot of support currently in Congress. Over 90 current members of Congress have signed on and co-sponsored term limits amendments that we have had introduced. However, to get to 2/3 is not attainable at this point, and that's where you come in. It's only by pressure from the state legislatures that we'll actually see this reality. And in fact, I would like to refer to one of your own. And in my research on Article 5, the first person that I found that ever suggested an Article 5 convention for congressional term limits was a gentleman by the name of Tench Cox from Philadelphia. July 1788 is when he made this suggestion. This was 1 month after the Constitution was ratified. And I just want to read a quick sentence. Quote, he said, "You have been told also that after the new Constitution takes place, the officers under it may become perpetual. Now, it is fully and absolutely secure that no representative, senator, president, or vice president can continue beyond a stipulated time. And if the people think that time too long, they can get their state legislatures to apply for its being shortened. If 9 legislatures out of 13 apply this year or 10 years hence, there must be a convention called to consider the point." That was over 200 years ago. And this issue has not gone away. Many of the framers supported term limits back then. They called it rotation of office. And in fact, the Pennsylvania's first Constitution had term limits in it. So did our Articles of Confederation. 7 of the states had rotation of office in them. So this is a foundational principle of our nation. It's not a new idea. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in regards to why we need them. I just want to briefly remind us that the approval ratings of Congress have consistently been very low, 15 to 20% for decades, yet the reelection rate has been over 96%. And that is because the incumbents have such an advantage over any challengers. The failure of Congress to address critical issues in our country, the debt, immigration, health care, they continue to kick the can down the road on these issues. We find them listening to their funders more than their constituents. And this is a study that came out in Princeton. 80% of the American people could want something. It doesn't matter. It has to be, if the funders want it, then we'll see it come to reality. And lastly, in members of Congress, there was a expose by 60 Minutes. 30 to 70% of time spent in Congress is not doing the work of the American people. It's raising money for their reelection and for their parties. This is the dysfunction we're experiencing as a nation. So in closing, I just want to share that we can't do this at the election, at the ballot box. We can't change human nature. We have to change the very structure so that we can allow more people to participate in our government. We, the voters, would have more choices at the ballot box because we'd have people with a variety, vast, different backgrounds and experience running for election. Right now, a lot of good people don't bother to run because they just cannot simply raise millions of dollars to go against an incumbent's war chest. And that's where term limits really will be a benefit and a reform to the American people. In closing, I would like to refer to current gentleman from Pennsylvania, Senator Patrick Toomey and Governor Ed Rendell. This was a op-ed in the Philadelphia Inquirer supporting this actual resolution. I'd just like to share a quote from the op-ed. Our system will not be fixed by those who broke it. Without enormous pressure, members of Congress will never vote to limit their own power and influence. With that in mind, we call on the Pennsylvania General Assembly to get the ball rolling by passing a resolution applying for a congressional term limits convention. We leave you with the words of a great Pennsylvania and fellow supporter of term limits, Benjamin Franklin. Quote, in free governments, the rulers are the servants, and the people their superiors. For the former to return among the latter does not degrade but promote them, unquote. We could not agree more. Let's work on something our country is united behind and increase faith in government. Let's place term limits on Congress, unquote. So I want to thank you for your time and your consideration on H.R. 57, which is the actual resolution before you for this effort. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Riley. I live in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I guess I vote in the 101st district, not the 102nd district. I have two roles here today. One, I am the legislative advocate for term limits here in Pennsylvania. It's a volunteer position. This is not what I get paid to do. I have another job, so I'm limited by the amount of effort and time that I can to support to this, obviously, because I have to feed my family too. But, you know, I do appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I've met with a lot of you and have had this conversation with many of you, so I appreciate you all having the opportunity to testify and finally getting this Article 5 process moving forward here in Pennsylvania. The other thing that I do is I'm also on the local team doing the grassroots effort. And in my testimony, you will see that we have about 25,000 people that we have gotten support from in the local population. Several of those grassroots efforts, it's interesting. There's a very simple question that I ask people when we're in these public forums. Are you happy with how Congress is performing today? And they'll be walking by the table and they will take a hard right and come right over to the table and go, what? What are you guys doing? How are we going to fix this? Because people are fed up, as Ken has said. And it's a very simple question. I don't ask them, you know, what are your political beliefs? Are you a Republican? Are you a liberal? Are you a conservative, progressive? That never gets brought up. The only thing they care about is fixing the performance of the U.S. Congress today. And so you see that we have 25,000 supporters in Pennsylvania. I will tell you that we've generated that 25,000 signatures with less than 20 people. It's us just going to some of these big shows and having a table, sitting there all on our time off, non-paid weekend, and having a conversation, and people will come up and sign the petition without asking a whole lot of questions. They want to see change, and that is why I'm excited about this opportunity to testify in front of you. I think that's the biggest thing. And those meetings, those conversations have happened in Philadelphia. They've happened in locally. They've happened in Sellersburg, and they've happened in Washington County. So it's across the entire swath of the Commonwealth that we are seeing this. It's not like a representation from just here in Lebanon County. It's from all over the state. So that's about all I wanted to say. I think that's the big point that I want to make. Obviously, Ken is the guru when it comes to Article 5. I'm kind of representing the local constituents and answering questions. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to be here.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. I'll start off with a couple questions, and then we'll go to any other members that have additional questions. So first, there are about, I think it's 15 or so states that have term limits in their state legislatures. And can you tell me how that's impacted their legislatures? Has satisfaction increased there? Are they working better? What can we learn from those states that have done this already?
In Maine, we do have term limits. It's actually a rotational basis where they have to be out of the chamber after 4 years and they can go to the Senate. Term limits, there's a study been done that shows that term limits actually do have a positive effect on spending at the state level. So the budgetary process is less with term limits in states. I'll give you an example as well. The Mercatus Center did a 5-year study that was published in 2018, ranking the states fiscally. 4 out of the top 5 states that were most fiscally solvent had term limits on their state legislatures. None of the bottom had term limits. And so oftentimes I'll hear term limits getting blamed for a lot of problems at the state level, but there's just really no support for that. We have a robust elections in Maine, and you mentioned the 15 states. It used to be 23. A few of those did overturn the term limits laws and remove those. But, yeah.
And I will note that we are being joined virtually now by Representative Diamond. My next question, and then we'll move on to others, is, you know, there are a lot of ways that people propose to fix Congress, term limits being one of them. Do you have thoughts on any of the other proposals or why term limits are better? And so, for instance, people have suggested increasing the size of the House of Representatives, increasing the length of terms to reduce the amount of fundraising. So there are other ideas floating down there or out there. Why is term limits the preferable option?
We're going down a rabbit hole, but you mentioned the size of Congress. Actually, one of the Bill of Rights amendments that was proposed by James Madison, if it was to be ratified today, would increase the size of Congress to 6,000 members. And it's still active. It's still possible, but that's neither here nor there. Yes, reform at the federal level. The reason why I believe this is the best reform at this possible time is because it's realistic. It's something that meets the requirements of having a successful amendments. It's supported by the American people. It's a reform that helps to return us to founding principles. And it's also an amendment that is easy to understand. We've done this before with the 22nd Amendment. We have it at state legislatures. We have term limits at municipalities, school boards, and across the board, and even Fortune 500 companies. So the understanding of the issue is easy for people. It's not a policy-driven issue. It's not a right or left issue. It's something that is pretty standard across the board. And so there are many reforms. I could spend the day talking about reforms, but in order to get an Article 5 convention called, it requires a consensus from 2/3 of the state legislatures. And once you start adding too many issues to that, we'll just never get to a convention. So this is a very limited subject matter, single subject, nonpartisan, highly supported.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Next up, I'll go to Chairman Kenyatta.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. Just simply, what length of terms are you suggesting for each chamber?
Yeah, we're not, and that's the beauty of this application. We just want to have the discussion. We want the state legislatures to have this discussion on behalf of the American people and let them hash it out, debate it at the convention. So in our application, HR 57, we are not advocating number of terms. We just want the discussion had. And so we feel best that if we narrowed it down to something too specific, it would not be successful. So that will be up to you as state legislators and the commissioners that you send. You can have that conversation in the back rooms with your commissioners and what you'd like for them to support.
Do you have an opinion? Just not
personal
obviously
opinion?
your personal opinion.
Yes, and this is the most popular form of term limits. 2 terms for a member of the U.S. Senate, so that'd be a total of 12 years served, and 3 terms for a member of the House. So one individual could serve in Congress for a total of 18 years. That's fairly reasonable, and so that seems to be the most popular form. Obviously, right now, a term for a House member is 2 years, a senator 6. So you want to have the House is to be more of a robust, active body, whereas the Senate a little bit more mature and slow to act. And so that would kind of keep that same check and balance between the two.
Thanks. I would say sometimes they're too slow to act, but all right.
Yeah. True.
All right. Thank you. Next, we'll go to Representative Madden.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your endeavor to make our government more fair and equitable. I have a different approach. I would argue that term limits are enshrined in every American citizen's constitutional right to get out and exercise their civic duty to vote. My problem lies in campaign finance. It's ridiculous how much money it takes to win a seat on the federal level, on the state level. I think when the Supreme Court said that corporations were citizens. We really dove into the abyss at that point, and I don't know how we get back. So I'm, and personally, I think my congressman, my 5-term congressman, is doing a spectacular job. Every year he is productive. He gets bills passed through, 2 presidents now, and I don't want to replace him anytime soon. But the fact that there is so much money in campaigns doesn't allow the grassroots organizer, the person who really has a new message, who has the potential to win a race, to even compete because there's so much money. And I think term limits is an easy fix. I think the really hard work is campaign finance. And I think we really need to work on that. I would also say that I agree with term limits for the President of the United States, and if I would explore term limits for any other body, it would be the Supreme Court. The idea that a president nominates and we nominate a Supreme Court justice who could be on that bench for 20, 30 years. It's not fair, it's not equitable, and as we see right now with the cases before the Supreme Court, it could be incredibly detrimental to things that we thought were, precedent for 40, 50 years. So I thank you for your testimony, and I welcome any comments you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Great point, and I do agree. There's a problem with campaign, with money being spent, and term limits actually is campaign finance reform. 97% of corporate PAC money goes to the incumbents. And what term limits will do is greatly reduce that money being spent on the incumbents because they're not going to give money to challengers. And so we will see a great reduction. It won't go away completely. There's no magic wand to fix all of our problems. But term limits not only is a form of campaign finance, it's also a form of fiscal responsibility as well. I do hear that, we have elections. And it's common, we like our congressperson, but not the other people. And so that's where we're stuck, because in order to get the whole body fixed, we do have to maybe live with the inconvenience of not having our favorite person in Congress so that the entire country could benefit more by a reform that's really has been wanting, the American people have been wanting for decades. Thomas Jefferson, he wrote to James Madison after he read the Constitution, he said, there's 2 things, here's the things I like about it. Here's the 2 things I hate about it. He did not include a Bill of Rights. He was really disappointed that the framers did not include that. He also said, you took out rotation of office. He said, as long as a president and senators can run for re-election, they will be officers for life because the people will not vote them out. And he was accurate. We need to fix the structure itself, and this is the only way we can get that done is with a consistent change of individuals. They can still serve. In fact, the framers, most of them, they didn't hold a seat for too long. They served at the government in the federal level, at the state government. They were ambassadors. So one seat, we're just saying that one seat cannot be held for 30, 40, 50 years. But they can serve the rest of their life throughout all levels of government and help in other ways. And so that's why this reform will bring to us. Thank you.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I absolutely agree. The problem is I remember when I was in Little Rock, Arkansas in 2009, NPR reported that the U.S. Congress had a 20% approval rating at that point. It's not gotten any better. So my question is, and this is a simple way of just kind of looking at this, if you went by a 5-star rating of Congress, they have 1 star. Would you be willing to eat at a restaurant that had a 1-star rating or stay in a hotel that has a 1-star rating? And that's only a temporary solution, right? Congress has permanent effects on all of our lives, and the fact that they are getting away with having a 20% approval rating and continue to have the same people over and over serving is very much the problem from a campaign finance reform. You're right, the money is the problem, and that's what's breaking the system. But at the same time, in a more common way of looking at things is how people look at things. They're just not happy with it. And I agree, there are people in Congress that are doing a great job. I just don't think that there are enough of them that are actually making a difference in our lives on a day-to-day basis.
Problems we have to fix. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Representative Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for testifying. I wonder if you guys could just squarely deal with those that are opposed. So it seems to come in two forms. One is incumbents have specific expertise that separates them from the newly elected representative, and that's gained over many years in service. And number two, and I think, Ken, you brought this up, that there was a decision made that there are very few restrictions on serving in office, right? So it's just age, citizenship requirement. But basically what we've decided is the people decide the rest. Why is that not the right approach? So incumbency and the people's right to choose their elected representatives.
Thank you for the questions. When it comes to institutional knowledge, I would like to just kind of look at that currently. In Congress, as of right now, we have 8,000 years of institutional knowledge. And let me share how I arrive at that number. The average tenure of a state legislator is 10 years. 50% of the members of Congress were formerly state legislators. The average tenure of a member of Congress is 10 years. When you add up the service and the institutional knowledge of their state level with their federal level, we have 8,000 years currently sitting in Congress right now. What is that getting us? That tends to be, I don't want to badmouth members of Congress, but just because they have knowledge doesn't make it always good. And what we really need is real life experience. They're so detached from the normal American citizen, they spend most of their time in D.C. with the lobbyists, the special interest groups. They become detached on what it is like to live under the laws that they're passing. And so when it comes to that institutional knowledge, what I would say term limits would eliminate, term limits will not destroy institutional knowledge. It's not like every year it's going to be a whole new set of individuals. There's still going to be overlap over terms. And so it's going to allow people with real life experience, many people who have better experience than what we have in DC. And one person does not have a monopoly on experience on certain topics. We have over, how many millions of people in this country? Many can serve that. So that would be my answer to the institutional knowledge aspect. When it comes to the people, I think you said that the people can change through elections. Well, the people have done that. They've elected to put term limits on Congress, and that's their choice. And so if we're going to believe in democracy, if we're going to believe in the will of the people and what they want, then this is overdue by decades because they have voted over and over and they continue to vote for term limits when it's on the ballot for them. So if we believe in a free democracy, then that is true democracy, letting the people have their choice by the representatives fulfilling their wishes on something that is important. It's not a whimsical idea. It's something that is foundational, and it will help introduce other reforms. And like I said, it's not a magic wand, but there are many good benefits to getting new eyes on problems that just simply are not being addressed. And so I agree, there's other issues, but we've got to start somewhere. And the key to this one particular one is this. If the states can call a convention for this one amendment and show to the American people and to yourselves that you have the power and the authority to fix issues at the federal level, then we can introduce these other great reforms, because now the fear of this whole process is alleviated. You'll see and realize the power that you have as state legislatures to address what's not being fixed at the federal level. And so these other ideas of reforms that you've mentioned can then be advanced the same way. So we just need to get to a convention to prove the process works. Hope that answered your question.
All right, well, thank you. Gentlemen, based on the conversation that we've had thus far, I do just have a couple other questions. So the topic of the Article 5 convention has come up, And one of the concerns that we hear when we discuss that topic is a runaway convention. Can you address that issue or that concern?
Yeah, I would like to address that. Give you a little background. I used to believe that. I was on the other side of the Article 5 issue. I was believing information coming from an organization that would use this idea of a runaway. I'll give you the historical context of that. This is a myth that was created to prevent some good reforms from being introduced. And let me share with you how and where it comes from. The opponents of an Article 5 convention claimed that Congress called this Philadelphia Convention of 1787. They called it to solely revise the Articles of Confederation. And what happened? They showed up in Philadelphia, and after a couple of weeks, the delegates threw out the articles and rewrote the whole document. That's simply not true. The Philadelphia Convention was not called by Congress. It was called by the state of Virginia based upon the recommendation that came from the Annapolis Convention the previous year. That convention recommended that a convention be held in Philadelphia in May of 1787 to, in fact, I included in my packet, to take, you know what? Yeah, it was actually to devise whatever means necessary to render the federal Constitution adequate to the exigencies of the Union. That was the call of that convention. It wasn't to revise the articles. And so the states sent their delegates. Each state legislature provided a commission stating that language in the commission. And so when those delegates arrived, they had full authority to do what they did on that day. So this idea of a runaway is based on a straw man argument that is not based on the facts of our history. That's the historical aspect. Let me give you realistic reality here. The states participate in a convention of states every single year. It's called the Uniform Law Commission. It operates exactly as an Article 5 convention, and I will give you the documentation. So you appoint the commissioners. It's a limited convention. They meet once a week, and they draft model acts. In fact, you are looking at several, I think 3 this year in the legislature that came from an official convention of the states. The only difference, when they vote, I was at this one this year, is held in Madison, Wisconsin. It's one state, one vote. That's how it's passed. Any act that is passed by the states at this convention, they bring it back to you, the legislature, to be adopted as state law. So the only difference between the Uniform Law Commission and an Article 5 convention is that instead of proposing amendments to the Constitution, they're proposing uniform state laws. And so you're actually using this process every single year, and I'll provide you the information on that, how you appoint them, and which bills you're actually looking at this year that came from it. So that's the reality. And the idea of this runaway is based on fantasy and fear, because you're already doing it. The only difference is instead of a uniform law, let's introduce a term limit amendment. That's the only difference. So, thank you.
All right. And the final question I have just came from the conversation that was occurring before about your personal preference for the amount of terms for members of Congress. And you had stated 2 6-year terms for the Senate and 3 2-year terms for the House. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so just I'm wondering why, the House has shorter term lengths, but why also the shorter amount of time? Why 6 years for House members versus 12 for the Senate? Does that create an unfair balance?
Well, I believe the intent on that is because the House should be more closer to the people and more refreshed on a regular basis, whereas the Senate is more of a contemplative body and more, that's why they're older too. I think you have to be 35 to be a senator, 25 to be a congressman. And so to have one representative in a House district there for 12 years just seems to kind of off balance how robust and close to the people it should be. I'll give you one main reason is that right now the age difference between members of Congress is close to 30 years between the median average age of a person in their district. And so there is such a discrepancy between the age of members of Congress and their constituents. I think this would allow younger people to be participating in those districts. I'm not married to specifically that out of the convention, but that tends to be the reasoning behind why we would have less time in the House, more time in the Senate, just so that we can cycle through more people in that district to kind of keep it a little bit closer to the will of the people.
Great. Well, thank you. And just for the members watching at home, just to clarify, that is a separate proposal. That's what's being proposed in Congress, and if they would be able to take that up, that's the proposal there. Again, the Article 5 term limits legislation does not have prescribed amounts of time. Again, it would go to the convention and allow those delegates at the convention to make that decision. So do want to thank you again, and I believe that's all the questions that we have today. So want to thank all of the members for joining us, and thank you as testifiers for joining us as well. Again, the resolution that I've introduced is House Resolution 57, which would create an Article 5 term limit process here in Pennsylvania so that we could participate. And I would ask members that are interested to please sign on to that and join us. And again, thank you for joining us, and everyone have a great day. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.